For most of history, power came from land, from trade routes, from armies that could take and hold both. That's what history teaches us. Control the ground, and you control the world. But in the 20th century, something strange happened. Power didn't rise from the surface anymore. It came from deep underground. Hidden beneath endless desert, oil changed everything. But here's the truth most people miss. It wasn't just oil that mattered. It was the system built around it. A system that could turn empty into global power. A system that could reshape economies, politics, even alliances. And once that system began to grow, it didn't just influence the world, it started to control it. So, how did something buried in the desert become the foundation of modern power? To understand that, we need to go back. The rise of oil economies in the Middle East is often told as a story of sudden wealth, empty deserts, and then, almost overnight, unimaginable riches. That's the version most people know. Simple, clean, almost magical. But that version misses something far more important. Because oil didn't just create rich nations. It created a completely new kind of economic structure. One where money wasn't isolated, power wasn't local, and decisions in one place could affect the entire world. Oil connected everything. Production in the desert, consumption in distant cities, and political decisions that shaped both. This wasn't just about selling a resource. It was about building a system where global dependence became the foundation. A system where countries didn't just need oil, they depended on the nations that controlled it. And that changed the balance of power forever. But to truly understand how powerful that system became, we need to go back to a time before all of it. A time when this region had almost none of this power at all. Before oil, much of the Middle East moved at a different pace. Life followed trade routes. Caravans crossing deserts. Ships carrying goods along ancient paths. Cities grew around movement, not around hidden wealth. Pilgrimage routes brought people. Local markets sustained communities. But the scale was limited. Wealth existed, but it was fragile. It depended on geography, on location, on who controlled the roads and ports. Empires came and went. Borders shifted again and again. But nothing made the region essential to the entire world. No single force tied it to global survival. And that was the real limitation. Because without that connection, power remained local. Important, but not central. Then, far away, something began to change. Industrial nations were growing fast. Factories expanding. Machines multiplying. And all of it needed one thing. Fuel. Not just any fuel, but something more powerful, more efficient, more scalable. Coal had limits, and the world was beginning to feel them. So the search began. A search that would push beyond Europe, beyond familiar lands, into places that had been overlooked for centuries. And that's where everything shifted. Because what they found wasn't just fuel. It was the beginning of a new system. But discovering oil was only the beginning. Finding it was one thing. Controlling it was something else entirely. Because oil, deep beneath the ground, was useless without the ability to extract it. And that ability didn't exist locally, at least not yet. So foreign companies arrived. They brought machines, engineers, and most importantly, contracts. On paper, these deals look simple. Help us extract the oil and we'll share the profits. But in reality, the balance was uneven. The technology was theirs. The expertise was theirs. And slowly, the control became theirs too. Local rulers faced a difficult choice. Accept these agreements and gain immediate wealth, or refuse them and risk leaving the oil untouched. It wasn't a real choice, because the world was already changing, and those who stayed out of the system would be left behind. So agreements were signed, fields were developed, exports began. But something deeper was taking shape. This wasn't just an industry growing. It was a structure forming, where control, profit, and dependence were tightly linked. A system where one side owned the resource, but the other controlled how it was used. And once that dependency was created, it didn't stay temporary. It became the foundation of everything that followed. And that's where the story takes a powerful turn. The turning point came quietly. At first, oil-producing nations were part of the system. but not in control of it. They had the resource, but others decided its value. Prices were influenced from outside. Production was guided by foreign interests. And slowly, a realization began to grow. The real power wasn't the oil itself. It was in controlling its flow. Not just how much existed, but how much reached the world. Because every factory, every car, every economy was starting to depend on it. And dependence creates leverage. So countries began to coordinate, not randomly, but strategically. Production levels were adjusted. Supply was managed. Access became a tool. This wasn't just about selling oil anymore. It was about shaping the global economy. A small shift in output could move prices across continents. A single decision could affect entire industries. For the first time, control started to shift from companies to nations, from extraction to strategy. And that changed everything. Because now, oil wasn't just fuel. It became influence. And once that kind of power was understood, it didn't stay limited. It expanded. The true strength of the system wasn't fully understood until it was tested. That moment came in the 1970s. Suddenly, oil supply was restricted. Not gradually, not quietly, but in a way the entire world could feel. Prices didn't just rise, they surged. Fuel became expensive overnight. Economies slowed down. Industries struggled to keep moving. And for the first time, something became clear. Energy wasn't just a resource anymore. It was a geopolitical weapon, a tool that could influence decisions far beyond borders. Countries that depended on oil began to feel exposed. Their growth, their stability, their daily life, all tied to something they didn't control. And that realization was uncomfortable, because dependence had turned into vulnerability. Meanwhile, the balance of power had shifted. The Middle East was no longer just supplying oil. It was shaping outcomes. A decision made in one region could ripple across the entire global economy. That was new, and it was undeniable. From that point on, oil wasn't just traded. It was negotiated, strategized, protected, because everyone now understood the same truth. Control the flow, and you influence the world. And once that reality settled in, its impact didn't fade. It evolved into something even bigger. As oil revenues grew, something even bigger began to take shape. At first, it looked simple. Money came in, and it stayed there. But that's not what happened, because oil wealth wasn't just stored. It was moved, reinvested into cities, redistributed across societies, and slowly built into long-term systems. Governments began thinking differently. This wasn't temporary income. This was a foundation. So infrastructure rose from the modern cities, airports, highways that connected what was once isolated. At the same time, something quieter was forming. Sovereign wealth funds, pools of money that didn't just sit still. They invested across countries, across industries, across the global economy itself. And now, the system was expanding beyond. It was no longer just about extraction. It was about finance, influence, global positioning. Money from oil began shaping markets far away from the desert. And over time, something powerful happened. The system became self-sustaining. Oil generated wealth. Wealth generated investment. Investment generated more influence. A cycle, one that didn't depend on a single moment, but kept reinforcing itself. And once a system reaches that point, it stops being temporary. It becomes permanent. But that raises a deeper question. What does it really mean when power is built on a system like this? Today, the system still exists, but it doesn't look the same. Oil is still there, still important, still flowing through the veins of the global economy. But something is shifting. Countries are diversifying, building new industries, preparing for a future where energy looks different. Renewables are rising, technology is accelerating, and global markets are becoming more complex. On the surface, it feels like a transition, like the world is moving away from the old system. But underneath, the structure hasn't really changed, because the core idea remains the same. Control something essential, and the world will depend on you. Before it was oil. Tomorrow it could be data, energy storage, critical minerals. The resource changes. The system stays. And that's the deeper truth. Power isn't just about what you have. It's about how the world relies on it. And once dependence is created, it doesn't disappear. It evolves. Which brings us to the final question. What does all of this really mean for the future of power? What this story reveals goes far beyond oil. Because, at its core, this was never just about a resource. It was about what happens when something becomes essential to everyone. That's when power begins to shift. Not through war, not through force, but through position. Where you stand in the system starts to matter more than what you own. And that's exactly what changed. The Middle East didn't just gain wealth, it gained leverage. The kind of leverage that doesn't need to be used loudly, because its presence alone is enough. A decision here could move markets there. A change in flow could affect millions of lives. And that quietly reshaped the balance of global power. Because in the modern world, control looks different. It's not always visible. It's not always direct. But it's always there, built into systems, hidden in dependencies, strengthened over time. And once you understand that, you start to see the world differently. Not as countries competing, but as systems and the few who sit at their center. The rise of oil economies wasn't just luck. It wasn't simply about geography or what happened to be buried underground. It was timing, it was strategy, and it was a world that suddenly needed what this region had. That combination changed everything. Because oil alone doesn't create power, but a system built around it does. A system that turns scarcity into influence, and influence into lasting power. Step by step, it grew from extraction to control to global dependence. And even now, as the world begins to change, that legacy hasn't disappeared. It's still there, just in a different form. Because systems like this don't fade away. They adapt, they evolve, they find new shapes in a changing world. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. Power isn't just something you hold. It's something you build and then learn how to keep. If you want to understand how power really works in the modern world, you have to look beyond the surface. Because the biggest forces aren't always visible. They're built into the systems around us. Quiet, constant, shaping everything. And once you start seeing them, you realize they were always there. This is just one story. There are many more hidden beneath the surface. So if you want to truly understand money, power, and the systems behind them, subscribe to Money Decoded. Because once you see the system, you can't unsee it.